on the document and send it back to her with the answers so she can send them any unanswered questions, the answers out to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mandy, for taking time out to be with us today.
You're very welcome.
Our crew is 100% focused on JB Hunt for 2018. My goal is to be the #1 recruiting firm. So
I like it. I like those kind of goals.
Yeah, you betcha. I know it's Angie's goal and the rest of our leadership team. So we're excited.
I am too.
Hi, Mandy.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. So I guess I got my computer issue fixed. I don't know really what was going on, but that was the delay. I know you're pushed for time, so everybody, when you come in, please mute your mics, and I'll let you take over if you want to introduce yourself, etc., Mandy, and we'll just get started.
Okay, sure. Excuse me. My name is Mandy Shoffett. For those of you who don't know, I am the recruiting manager here at JB Hunt, and I'm also the responsible recruiting manager for being the liaison between our department and all of the third-party vendors and recruiters. So any questions, issues, anything like that should be coming through me now. I replaced Aaron Martinez as he went and took a different position within the company. So, and I'm just here. Angie and I have been going back and forth. John was teasing that we are best friends now because we've been going back and forth trying to make the process that we have smoother and more efficient for everybody. And there's just a lot of questions. I think she sent out for you guys to submit questions that you had. And so I've got a pretty good list here. And I just want to take the time today to kind of go over some of those questions and see if I can make things a little more clear and just help make this relationship smoother and more beneficial on both ends.
Sounds
Awesome.
great.
Well, we're thrilled that you're here. I'm going to let Angie and you facilitate this meeting. I am going to stay on the call. If any of the recruiters or anybody have anything on a side note to ask, please message Angie through the chat section. And Angie, thank you so much for setting this call up with me too. I really do appreciate your hard work.
Thank you, guys.
I'm going to mute my line and you guys go at it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so one of the questions was, if you qualify on a driver, what are the top 3 questions that we should be asking the truck drivers in the field?
Well, my first answer to that is that thoroughly going, first is there's not necessarily 3 questions to thoroughly pre-qualify an applicant. The top 3 categories, I would say, would be to make sure that they have the required experience, making sure that they have a good safety history, which includes asking them about accidents and moving violations, and something that recruiters often forget is asking them about their work history and why they left previous employers. We found that a lot of times a driver will tell you, nope, I have a clean safety record, nothing on my motor vehicle report. And then when we ask them why they left their last employer, we find out that they were fired because they had an accident. While that accident might not be on their motor vehicle report, it's still going to come back in a job verification and be counted against them from a safety standpoint. So checking on their safety history and making sure that they're being set up for the position that meets their needs. We have a lot of drivers that are called in, and when going over the job description, they say that they're not interested in that position. What they're really looking for is this, or what they really need is, I can't work on Sundays for this, that, or the other reason for a position that requires them to work on Sundays. So really just making sure that you're listening to the driver and matching them with the position that really is going to work for them, and making sure that they qualify for that position.
Sounds great.
Okay.
You and I discussed in an email prior, and I can share to everyone. But you were telling me the Class A and B experience. We say over the road, and you was explaining to me about the 40-foot. Can you kind of just briefly, and then I can send that to everyone on this one.
Yes. So there is a difference between, and a lot of times our application specialist won't phrase it right. They will say something like, that's not Class A experience. And the problem usually comes with, there are lots of positions out there, lots of jobs that drivers can do that require them to have a Class A license and therefore is a Class A job. However, we don't consider it like experience. I air quote the like there. What we consider like experience is a driver driving a combination tractor with a 40+ foot trailer. So the trailer has to be at least 40 foot long, cannot be bayside. And if you've ever seen a regular dry van next to one of those side bay, like Pepsi or Coke trucks, you can see why there's a significant size difference. In order to be counted for 100% of the time, so like if they say 3 months, it has to be at least 1,000 miles per week full-time driving. If they say they were driving a straight truck 50% of the time and a full-size truck 50% of the time, then they're only going to get half the time credit. So even though they were doing it for 3 months, they're only going to get a month and a half's worth of credit if they weren't driving that full-size tractor trailer 100% of the time. And the experience has to be with a DOT regulated carrier. Usually when we run into that not being the case is if it's for like a logging company or oil field work. Frequently they do most of their driving in like dirt roads and fields and in the woods. And there are some companies that if that's all that they're doing, they don't have a DOT number. They don't have to follow the same DOT guidelines. So in order for us to count it as like experience, it has to be with a DOT regulated carrier, full time, and with a combination tractor and at least 40-foot trailer. Now, anything that's a straight truck or a shorter trailer or those bayside trailers that we talked about before, those would all be considered, they would qualify as Class B experience. While some might require a Class A license, they only qualify for us for Class B experience, which only helps them if they're applying for a Class B position that only requires a Class B license or experience, which we only have a few of those positions. And most of them, well, all of those positions, they're going to be driving a straight truck for us. And so Final Mile obviously is one that you guys are probably familiar with, but that is not being recruited for outside anymore. But we have a couple of Home Depot accounts where they drive straight trucks and aren't required to have the Class A license or Class A experience. That's where that kind of experience would come in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference in qualifications like on truckload and dedicated that would help us in selling the job? Because I know like it's 6 months in the last 12 months or 3 months in the last 6 months. That maybe you could help them understand that. Because I think everybody focuses on the dedicated, but there's a lot of good truckload positions out there as well. And we've done well, I think, with selling dedicated positions. I think we got an email a while back, if I'm right, John, about, what's the holdup on selling truckload. And we need to focus on both of those.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, when you're selling truckload and historically when you're trying to sell a truckload job, what made that an easy sell was that they required less experience than any other position. So for those drivers that were fresh out of their 3 months experience, they could go into truckload and then work their way into a dedicated position. Right now, though, we have so many dedicated positions open and our driver need is so high that many of our dedicated positions also have the same hiring requirements as the truckload positions. So the short answer is no, there's not necessarily a difference. There are some positions that have higher experience requirements. So if the experience requirement says 3 months, then any of those experience levels that are in a different question actually will qualify. However, if it says 6 months or 12 months, usually you're only going to find 6 or 12-month experience requirement accounts in dedicated or intermodal. But we do have a ton of both that have the exact same experience requirements in truckload. One selling point about truckload, though, is that dedicated accounts typically have just a flat pay. It's the same cent per mile for every driver, no matter what. Same unload pay. And of course, they will usually get raises annually. But for truckload, many of our truckload jobs, the starting pay is tiered based on verified experience. So depending on how much experience we're able to verify on their application, they can start at a higher cent per mile for a truckload position, and I for most truckload positions, based on how much experience they have. But really, when it comes to selling dedicated versus truckload, the biggest difference is location. For some drivers, depending on where they live, truckload may be the only option. And for some, there are different types of drivers out there. There are some drivers that prefer truckload. Maybe they don't have an apartment and they enjoy the freedom of being able to live in their truck and travel around. And that goes back to what I said before about just finding the right driver for the position. So when it comes to our experience requirements, they're not always different for the two.
Okay, because there's been some question with that, and you and I talked about that a little bit, so I wanted to make sure I covered it.
Let me just, hey Angie, let me just throw in something too. If you look at the truckload positions predominantly down in the southern states, deep into the southern states that JB Hunt has available, the drivers with experience will make more money on a truckload position with JB Hunt than they would with most other companies, because they do pay the experience based on the experience. So in the real deep southern states like Mississippi, Louisiana, parts of Texas, parts of Alabama, where you see truckload positions opened up, those drivers that are down in those areas have a hard time finding jobs. But when they do find them, they're going to find that JB Hunt's truckload position offers a higher pay based on their experience.
Okay, thank you, John. Carrie, one of the questions, you and I were talking about this as well in an email about criminal background. How far in depth should we go with this? I mean, we've asked drivers, what's your criminal background look like? We don't try to get too nosy with it, of course, but we've turned some drivers away that maybe we could have submitted, and then you guys could check. So just wanted to clear the air on that one.
That's a good question. I was really actually happy to see this question in the list. And here's the reason. Our internal recruiters do not ask any criminal background questions. In fact, our application specialists even avoid asking criminal background questions unless they're specifically related to drug or alcohol crimes that would be something DOT regulated. And the reason for that is because it is not actually legal to deny an applicant the opportunity to apply for a job based on their criminal background. So we have to allow an applicant to get all the way through the application and apply for the job. And then on our end, we send them some legal disclaimers. We ask them on the phone if they received the disclaimer, if they need a chance to take a look at it, and give them all that opportunity before our background specialist ever asks them that simple question, have you ever been convicted of a crime? So unless it's a drug or alcohol related, like recent possession charges, and even in that case, our application specialists are only asking about those for a certain small time period. So my recommendation there would be to avoid asking criminal questions altogether. Our company stance is that we evaluate all criminal charges on an individual basis and in conjunction with the overall application, and then make a determination from that point. So from a recruiting standpoint, I wouldn't get into criminal questions at all.
Right. So with the DOT, I know like failed drug tests and things like that. I guess one way we could implement that is if, well, I guess we kind of just avoid it altogether. When we ask if they've ever been terminated from the last job or whatever, that would kind of fall in. If they failed a drug test, they would tell it, I guess.
Right. And that's, yeah, the failed drug tests. I mean, those aren't criminal issues, obviously. And if you ask about DUIs, which is a driving record question, then they're going to tell you if they had any issues there. But when it comes to actual criminal charges, it's really, it's treading on pretty dangerous water to tell a driver that they shouldn't apply for a position because of something they tell. And we do see on our end, a lot of times we'll talk to drivers that say, look, I don't think I qualify with you guys. I don't want to go through this process if you're just going to turn me down because of something in my background. And they want to get it off their chest right up front and tell us all about it before they bother doing the application. And in those situations, our sort of that blurb that I just said is sort of our stance, is that all of our criminal charges are evaluated on an individual basis with the overall application in mind. And so our recruiters just tell them, look, I don't do that. Sometimes we will have a driver say, I'm currently on probation right now, so I know you can't hire me. If they want to approach it like that, it's fine, of course, to say, okay, well, call me back when you think you'll be eligible or something to that effect. But we'll take the application all the way through the process before telling them that they don't qualify, to make sure that it's not something that we can't accept.
I think that's great. What are some of the little known facts about JB that would help us in selling a job? I mean, I know you and I have also talked about this. There's a lot of things that we could use with this, but something that you see works on your end, that kind of gets them to take the job.
That's another good question. Obviously, we have the standard consistent freight base, number one intermodal carrier, benefits. Excuse me. One thing that is not, I don't know, is probably not as well known, is that our pay is based on the honor system. So whatever load a driver completes and enters in his OBC that he's completed that load, by the end of the pay period, he will get paid for that load and those miles on his very next paycheck, even if he hasn't turned in his trip pack. So some companies require that whole packet of documents be scanned in, faxed in, whatever that company requires before they'll pay on it. We go based off of what is completed on the driver's onboard computer. And then, it might take them a couple of days to get to a truck stop and scan their trip pack in, but they're already paid for that as soon as it's completed. We're also paid weekly. And one of the obvious benefits is JB Hunt's a big company, so when they get their pay, they know it's going to be there and they know it's going to clear. You're not ever going to have to worry about, well, I've waited 3 weeks for this company to pay me, but my check didn't clear the bank and now they won't give me another paycheck and they owe me all this money, and that's not going to be the case with us. Another key selling point is the vast majority. I believe the latest number that I heard, and don't quote me on this, but I believe the latest number I heard was 90% of all of our open positions, or of all of our positions at JB Hunt, are either local or regional, meaning that you're home daily or home weekly, which is a big difference from the way it used to be, where most of our jobs were over the road. And in that situation, even if you have to start with an over-the-road position or with a regional position where you're home weekly, we encourage a career path. And all of our drivers are eligible after 90 days on the account that they're hired on to transfer to a different position where there's an opening. Once they've been there for 90 days, we actually have what's called the driver portal, And it's a place where they can view all positions in their area and they can submit interest for a position. So when that account has an opening, they go in and look for current drivers who have expressed interest in that job first before they open it outside. So that's a huge selling point, because those drivers that, maybe there's not a local job open in their area right now, you can tell them that if they come on and take this regional job where they still are getting home weekly, then they might be able to transfer to a local position when one opens in their area in the future.
One of the questions that kind of just arose when I was sitting there thinking about it, how are you guys handling it when they don't say, when they say they don't want to work for JB? Like, what are you doing to change your reputation with the new breed of drivers?
That's a good question too. One of the things that we're doing as a company to change that reputation is we have started a whole new wave of the driver experience. It includes several different teams, experienced teams. Our truckload guys, when they are done with orientation, they work for a little while after orientation with a truckload experience manager that they give them additional training with the onboard computers, help answer any questions that they might have, because truckload drivers, as most of you know, don't actually go out with a trainer like on some dedicated positions. So those experience managers help them with the things that they miss by not having to do that. We also have a driver experience team here in the corporate office that deals with any complaints that a driver has. So if a driver brings something to his fleet manager's attention and he feels like it's not being handled or not being taken care of, we have a team that's dedicated to following up with those drivers. They will go above the fleet manager's head if necessary to get things taken care of. We have a lot of great technology to make things easier for our drivers. And so really, when we get that objection right off the bat, the first thing that our recruiters, say is, I'm sorry to hear that you, aren't interested in JB Hunt. If you don't mind, can you tell me why that is? Tell me what happens. Have you had a bad experience with us in the past? Usually, if you can get that question out of your mouth, a driver is more than eager to give an answer and tell you why he doesn't want to work with JB Hunt. And about half the time, you end up finding out it's because he already knows he doesn't qualify because of something in his, failed drug test issues or things like that. And the other part of the time, sometimes they have an idea in their mind that JB Hunt does this or that. I've heard several times, no, I'm not driving for JB Hunt. Okay, well, can you tell me why? Have you had a bad experience? No, I'm just not doing over the road. And the recruiter will say, well, I was actually calling you about a regional position or a local position. And they say, well, I didn't know JB Hunt had local jobs. So sometimes it's just an outdated idea in their mind of what JB Hunt does. Other times it's because of an experience they've had, usually where they don't qualify. And sometimes, they've just heard something, through the grapevine, and those things that are, real legitimate complaints, we're working internally on trying to make sure that we're fixing to change that reputation.
Yeah, I agree. And then one of the things that I used to hear a lot that I'm not hearing as much was like the speed of the trucks. But I think the ELD system coming into effect is kind of changing that for everyone. So I think we'll see a big difference in that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's not as relevant as it used to be, for sure.
With owner-operator drivers, what is a good thing that we can I know we don't sell owner-operator positions, but when we have owner-operators looking for a position, truckload or dedicated, I know that one of the things that I've seen with taking notes and looking at data, a lot of our rejections from not being qualified is because they were owner-operator and y'all couldn't verify the experience. So I think if we could come up with a good pre-qualifying in that case, we could save everyone's time of submitting drivers. You still here?
I forgot to unmute myself.
Okay.
I was just talking away and answering your question. They there's a few really simple things that an owner operator will have to be able to verify their own experience. So if they were working with another company, or if they were leased onto another company and that other company was paying them and keeping track of their stuff and put them in their random drug testing pool, then we can verify with that other company. But if they were running under their own authority, so not leased under anybody else, but under their own authority, they have to be able to provide us tax documents showing that they were working full time. Excuse me. They have to be able to provide us the name, phone number, city, and state of the drug and alcohol consortium that they were a member of, and that has to cover at least the last 6 months of their self-employment. And obviously they would need to be able to tell us the information about their truck, which they almost all can. But the drug and alcohol consortium, a lot of them either won't have that information or will say that they let their policy lapse and they haven't been a part of one for a while. That's what catches a lot of drivers. That is a requirement. They have to have been part of that for the last 6 months in order to be able to count that experience.
Okay, I think that really helps us a lot, in my opinion. I don't know how the rest of them feel about it, but I know the verifiable experience and want to wear the tax documents. So,
Hey, Mandy, this is John. Do you think that JB Hunt or you could pull it off, or we could recruit for owner operators? We get a lot of calls. I mean, it would be a very beneficial thing for you guys.
Yeah, that's those decisions, unfortunately, are slightly above my pay grade. Similar to Final Mile, we have an IC team whose focus is hiring owner operators. They also focus on lease purchase arrangements that we have and things like that. For a traditional IC, like for a truckload IC, I don't know that it's completely off the table forever.
It's just that it's a bummer, to be honest with you. You might want to make a note of it to send them to Roadrunner when we do where JB Hunt's our main, platform.
Right. Yeah.
At least you know that we do get those leads, but we're just sending them elsewhere, and that's kind of a bummer, really.
Yeah. And I'll put that bug in Burton's ear. Another one possible reason for it is we have a lot of our dedicated accounts don't have they don't take owner operators. And Intermodal has just recently started taking owner operators. If that's something that expands, I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that they allowed you guys to recruit for in the future. But as it stands up to this point, we haven't really had a high enough need that our small IC team couldn't handle the need that we have for IC.
Well, we're willing to be a test rat for you guys, so just pass up.
Okay, I certainly will.
Are there any miles outside of the hiring radius that we could submit a driver for? Like if it's 10 miles outside, I know we run into a lot of drivers within 5 to 10 miles, and we're kind of hesitant about sending them.
The standard exception as a general rule is 5 miles. An application specialist manager should be able to make the exception for anything under 5 miles on their own without even having to ask a hiring manager, with the exception of there are a couple of positions that, because of their location, the kind of work they do, the surrounding areas, they have very tight hiring radiuses, and some of those say no exceptions on the hiring radius. Obviously, the larger the radius is, we have some that have hiring radius of 150 miles. So there's a better likelihood of being able to get maybe a 10-mile radius exception if the radius is 150 miles. But if the hiring radius is limited to 40 miles, then really 5 miles is going to be the most that we're going to be able to make an exception on.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any times or exceptions that a driver with a contract with another company, like if they're contracted with CR England? I know we've submitted drivers sometimes and they've been under contract with them and they've gotten hired, and then some companies not. So I don't know if there's like a list of companies, if they're under a contract, we could maybe get.
Where you're probably remembering that from is we did have a stipulation with CRST due to a lawsuit where for a period of time we were not allowed to take an application from, hire or even take an application from a driver that was under contract with CRST. That has since been lifted. We're now outside of the time frame of that restriction. So we are allowed to hire drivers who are under contract with another company. However, their contract obligations with that company are between the driver and that company. We are not intentionally soliciting drivers who are under contract with other carriers, but if that's a decision they've made and an obligation they have, their contract obligations are between them and the other carrier. And we will not pay out any contracts for them, if that makes sense.
Okay, that does. And so pretty much that's something we don't have to ask, is if they're under contract with anyone else. That's
correct.
On.
Right. And sometimes it's an objection that you'll get. You'll sometimes hear a driver say, oh, I can't make a move right now because I'm under contract. And they'll, keep my last paycheck or sue me for the money. And different companies handle that differently, I'm sure. If they're under a financial obligation with that company, then I'm sure that financial obligation still stands. So it might be an objection on the driver's side, but it does not prevent us from hiring a driver. No.
I just got a question in the chat. Face-to-face interviews. I know this was one of the things that, we've talked about. We don't get paid for final mile, but I had a case of a driver, an agent submitted a driver and it was an interview position. Mm-hmm. We still get paid for those, correct? It's just the final miles that we're not.
Yes, at this time. However, we have a couple of positions that while the title of the position is not actually final mile, they fall under the final mile region umbrella. The hiring manager has said that she does want those also because they're technically final mile region jobs. She wants those taken off of the table. The reverse of that, though, is that we have some positions in a totally different region where the hiring manager says, hey, they'll take all the interviews they can get. If your people can send us interviews, then great. Different types of jobs. So at this time, as long as it's not an official, traditional final mile interview account, you will be paid for it. But I would expect in the very near future, there are two that come to mind. One is a YKK and one is a Beals or Bells. Those two are technically under the final mile umbrella and they will probably be off the table. But our IT people are working on a way to help with that process with you guys so that you're not having to fish through job descriptions and figure out if you can or can't hire for it. They're trying to make it to where we can mark a position and have it removed from the portal so it's not even in your view, so that whatever's there, that you can recruit for and you don't have to worry about it. So that's something that we're working on right now, and they're hoping within the next month to have that good to go and up and rolling. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. So at this point, I would say yes for now, but not for long.
Right. And one of she added with that question about Coppell, Texas. I know that's the one that was an interview position, but you said we did get paid on that one.
Yes. And that's JMC. That one, the one in Coppell, Texas is JMC. It is not under the final mile umbrella, so it's not in question at all. That's the one that the hiring manager says lay it on me, give me all you got.
Okay. And another thing that while we're on this, that people ask me a lot, a lot of positions will say Class B experience only. But if it's in the truckload or dedicated position, we still get paid on those, correct?
Yes, that usually the only ones that would say Class B would be like the Home Depot Pro. And it shouldn't say only, it should say like accepted. There used to be some of our final mile positions would say Class B only, and that's because they were having a problem with hiring drivers that had Class A licenses and a Class A experience for a Class B position, and the pay wasn't equivalent to a Class A job, and so they were losing those drivers almost immediately upon hire to other Class A positions. So they tried to restrict it for a while where you couldn't hire a driver that had a Class A license or Class A experience for a Class B job. I haven't seen that much recently. Usually if it says Class B, it could be Class B or Class A.
Yes.
But yes, as long as it's not a final mile interview account, then you should be fine for those as well.
Okay. Just briefly, I know it's a lot involved in a rehire process, but I know that one of the things we had that I was telling an agent to get the driver to sign the releases, and he came back and said, no, he had went through, I think 2 months ago, and he didn't have to re-sign the releases. So what kind of time frame is that the releases are still good?
Well, a release form is only good for 30 days. So I don't know if that driver was confused about that situation, but all of our release forms have to be re-signed if they have expired, if they were signed outside of the last 30 days. Now, the rehire process, though, is a little different than the release forms being signed. Our rehire process is a time and cost-saving process that we have for drivers who worked with JB Hunt within the last 6 to 12 months. And whether it's 6 or 12 depends on how long they stayed with us. Many of these drivers may be exempt from certain things like the road test or Smith system training. And if they are exempt, they can often drug test and have the SCE done at a clinic near their home and avoid having to come into an orientation location at all, or at least avoid having to come in for a full orientation. So those drivers are processed by a specific team in our safety department. And you'll likely see several reschedule notifications for those drivers, because when they try to call the driver and maybe they leave a voicemail or don't get an answer, they will reschedule. They'll change the date on their application to the next day. And that just ensures that that driver stays in their current roster so that they don't lose track of the driver. They might schedule a drug test, and then the drug test will be done today, and then 2 days from now, something else will be done. Each time that they complete a step, they change the date on that application again, just to ensure that that applicant remains in their pipeline view and they don't fall through the cracks. So that's why you'll see a lot of reschedules on those. They're being handled by a team of 2 or 3 people that are on the phone back and forth with them, walking them through things that they can do at home or locally to keep from having to go all the way to an orientation and complete orientation that way.
Right. And I noticed that, Marcus is on here with his driver. I asked you because we kept getting updates, and you're like, that happens the way they note it in the system. We get an email on it, and it was just that he had taken the drug test and the hiring manager was trying to get him in. So the rehires, I think we get a lot of notifications on it, so just to kind of clear it up with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We noticed that some of the drivers are dropping out at the last minute. And, we've had a lot of those, and you and I discussed that as well, and y'all are too. So with a criminal background and everything, if we call a driver in right now, and they're scheduled sometimes 2 and 3 weeks out, when is the actual background checks and everything done? Is it done like a week ahead of time, or is it done immediately? I guess it's closer to orientation, our drivers are falling out.
Yeah. And part of that, it's two-sided. They do, they try to order their motor vehicle report a week in advance. They try to get all of that that sort of thing, stuff done that's quick and easy and comes back fast. Part of the problem is we have a lot of gray area in our hiring part right now. So while we might have a driver that something negative comes back, rather than the manager just immediately saying, nope, we don't want this driver and rejecting them out, they're trying to make sure that they've worked the whole file to see if there's any way that they can make an exception, to see if there's any, they want them to keep trying to contact this company that they don't think or that they couldn't reach. And they're really pushing their people to not just be quick to reject a driver, but to give it everything they've got to try to see if we can get them qualified.
That's really good, because where we're looking at it is them falling out at the last minute. We're looking at it in a good way. However, it's more positive because that means you went above and beyond to try to get that driver approved.
Right. Another thing that sometimes happens particularly when it's for a criminal type thing, we order a criminal report. It's a click of a button and it comes back almost immediately. That's their national criminal scan. That might come back clear. Most of the time it does. But then ordering that will trigger a county criminal scan. And that county criminal scan, those can sometimes take a week or two before they show up in the file. So while we get their national criminal scan, it looks like everything's fine. And, we're trucking along and it looks like they're going to be great. All of a sudden one day, a county specific scan will pop up and can contain a lot of charges that weren't in the national scan that can be disqualifying. So that also happens sometimes. And sometimes they even pop up after the driver's been hired and we have to take the driver off the truck because they neglected to tell us about something that, is disqualifying. And it's just a matter of small towns, small counties not getting things submitted back to us as quickly as the automated national ones are.
And another thing on that, I know with my experience in the hiring end, a lot of agents have came to me and was like, wait, this guy was approved, and then 3 days before orientation, he's rejected because of lack of experience. How does that happen? And I hope I'm correcting this on your process, but back up 3 years per DOT and do their previous employment checks whenever those slowly come in. Some companies is not on to this quickly. And their experience is just not verified at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Is that the reason why we get that at the end?
Yes, that's part of the reason. Part of the reason why they'll say that they were approved and then rejected is there's 2 steps to the approval to our process. Obviously, the application process. So an application specialist might send it to their manager to review it. An application specialist manager will approve something if they think there's a chance. So if they think that there's a chance that driver is going to qualify, they're going to approve it and let our background team do the verification and see if they do. The application specialist manager really is only going to reject somebody when they clearly don't meet our guidelines. So it may be approved by an application specialist manager and then rejected later by a background verification manager. After the background specialist has done the verification, we find frequently discrepancies in dates. A driver will kind of stretch how long he was with the company. And by the time they've stretched the time that they were with 2 or 3 companies, you take out, a week here, a month there, and it can often lead to them not meet experience requirements when everything's verified. And yes, unfortunately, some companies we can verify their dates within a few seconds on a third-party job verification website. Others will absolutely wait until the very last legal 30th day before they'll give us any information.
All right, and with the automatic restrictions, I think I know this answer as well, but I just wanted to kind of cover it with everyone here. Some positions you can do automatic restrictions for, and some you can't. And I guess it's just depending on if you have automatics for that account. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's the exact right answer. We are replacing all of our trucks with automatics, but it's obviously with a fleet as large as ours, it's a gradual process. It will take time as we get those trucks in. So what happens is when the driver tells the application specialist that they have an automatic restriction, they have to get with the hiring manager and find out if the account that they're coming onto has automatic trucks. and has enough automatic trucks that they can ensure that that driver will be given an automatic truck. If so, then they make arrangements at orientation for them to be road tested in an automatic truck. At this point, like Amazon has almost all automatic trucks. And as we get shipments of trucks in and replace them, a few might go here, a few might go here, and one full account might be replaced with automatics. So it's just something they have to check with the hiring manager and see if that account has automatic trucks at that time and can ensure that driver is going to get an automatic truck.
Okay. Some of these questions I kind of skipped through because I know we'll be limited on time, and I can tell your voice is starting to get scratchy.
It really is. I'm sorry. I was just thinking, I'm not sure where I can go.
One of the things, and it's several that are very important that I think we need to cover. Like, I know that you've told us pretty much how that when the driver's scheduled, you know, what's happening on the JB side, and you know what we need to do to make sure the drivers are going through. And I guess that would fall back into the follow-up calls. But some of the questions that I have skipped is, like, can we have things added to the job description? Can I send you those that would help on the recruiting side, and you can kind of take a look and then answer back an email?
Yeah, are those questions that are on the list that you already gave me?
Yes. So, I mean,
Okay.
some of the things like, you know, how many positions do you need for to be filled? I think those would help us. You know, we can attack those important positions. You know,
yeah, and that's something that I did want to answer on the call. Hold on, let me actually find out where okay, so the actual question I think was, is there any way for you to know how many drivers jobs are needing? And unfortunately, the way the system that we use is set up, there's not any way for you to see that. What I can do is I can try to send something out occasionally with a list of the higher need accounts, so ones that have, you know, 5+ driver need. The problem with that is I'm not allowed to send a list of just all of our openings and how many needs they have with all the position titles, and that's for privacy reasons for the actual accounts for the customer. But I can send you, you know, a list of 5 to 10 occasionally that have the highest need, that you know that it's safe to, you know, spend money, you know, advertising or posting for this job because it's not going to fill, you know, tomorrow. So that's something that I will try to remember to do once every couple of weeks at least, sort of refresh with, here are our positions with the top need. And I can't send all of them and what they need, but I can send you a list of, you know, the ones with the highest need.
that's awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
So briefly, you know, so we can skip through, like the scheduler, when we get off the line with them, you know, do they try to call the drivers back? Like if they didn't answer the phone, I guess are they going above and beyond as well to help us in trying to get them in, or do they wait until the 48 hours is up?
I actually just had a meeting with 2 teams of application specialists this morning, which is another reason why my voice is giving a little bit, is I talked to them for an hour. But yes, they are required to attempt to call the driver more than one time, unless, of course, it's, you know, a disconnected number or it's obviously the wrong phone number. They call the driver. If the driver doesn't answer and there's an ability to leave a voicemail, they leave a voicemail with their name and phone number and ask the driver to call them back to complete the application. Now, once that happens, if the driver doesn't call them back, or if there's no follow-up, you know, obviously their phones are ringing all day, every day with new applications. So they're not necessarily going to try to call that driver back again in 2 hours or the next day, but they are right then at that time going to make more than one attempt to try to call that driver back and leave them a voicemail to call. After that point, if the driver didn't answer, and that's something that's important to let the recruiter know, or for the recruiter to let the driver know, that they'll be getting a phone call that it will be coming from an 800 number, that it's important that they answer that call, because a lot of drivers don't want to answer just a random phone number that they don't recognize. So it's important to kind of prepare the driver about how that process is going to work beforehand so they know to answer. But honestly, sometimes it's no different than, the way we are when we get a solicitation call, at the first opportunity to disconnect that call. Sometimes drivers do that. They might talk to the recruiter and, go through the whole, oh yeah, sure. And if the first opportunity they have to disconnect the call and not answer, they're going to take it. Why that happens is beyond me, but it happens with us too. We lose drivers left and right as we say, okay, hold on, we're going to connect you with a scheduler. And as soon as they put them on hold to connect them with the scheduler, they hang up the phone and don't answer again. So that's certainly not something the application specialists are trying to do, but I did have a discussion with him today about how many times I've seen the notes come through that say the driver didn't have his work history in front of him, so he has to call back later. And I explained to them that it's their job to try to talk that driver through from current backwards through their work history, and that they need to stop asking the driver up front, do you have 10 years of driving history and 3 years of work history in front of you so that we can go through this? Because most of them are going to say no. However, it would be a good idea for your recruiters to warn the driver up front that they are going to be asking for 10 years of driving history and 3 years of work history, that it does not have to be exact. The dates don't have to be exact. They just need to be able to ballpark it and give them a pretty decent idea of their work history and a place to start. That way the driver's at least willing to try to go through that process with them instead of saying, no, I don't have all that information. I'll just call you back later. But be prepared. I have a lot of drivers, I hear when I'm listening to calls, a lot of drivers say, oh, well, I thought this was just going to be about a 5 or 10 minute process. Unless that driver just applied for a job with us last week and filled out an application last week, it's definitely not going to be a 5 to 10 minute process. So please make sure that everybody is relaying to their drivers that it is going to be a little bit of a time-consuming process. A brand new driver that's never applied with us before can take 45 minutes to an hour. And one that has an application that we're updating, within a year or two is still going to take probably 20 to 30 minutes. So preparing that driver in advance for that and making sure that the call is being made when they're have the time to do that can make a big difference.
One thing that on that though, whenever a driver doesn't have the work history and we get a rejection saying they didn't have it, if that driver calls back in without us, are we still covered in that 48-hour window?
Yes, you should be covered in the 48-hour window, given as long as they opened an application. Because if the driver calls back in and gets a hold of somebody else, and the original application specialist never opened an application, then when they call in, if they get hold of somebody else is not going to know that they were called in by you.
Right. So when you said you had a meeting this morning that they were stopping them in the very beginning, then that could have hurt us in the case of, getting in that 48-hour window. So you're working on that to make sure they actually open the application. So stopping them.
Right. And that's what I told him. If I see notes on page 1 that they didn't have their work history, then I know you're not even trying. Or if I see notes on the work history page and you haven't even entered their current job, then I know you're not even trying. So hopefully that will get them to try. And I've also, I'm sure you've seen, I've also asked them that anytime a driver is called in and not scheduled, to send me an email with the driver's name, the recruiter's name, the company that they're with, and just a brief little sentence about why the driver wasn't scheduled. And I've been forwarding those back out to the managers of the third-party companies. So I've now officially met with all of the application specialist team requesting that anytime they get a third-party call and that driver does not end up getting scheduled, that they send me the information and tell me why. And that I'm sending back to you guys so that if you get an email that says the driver didn't have his work history, that means that your recruiter needs to call that driver back and tell them, hey, they're saying you don't have your work history. maybe even your recruiter kind of go through. You don't have to have a resume written down with exact dates. Like, can you tell me what companies have you kind of help talk them through that and get them back on the phone with the application specialist, so that you do get credit for it. Most of the time, drivers are not going to call back on their own.
Right. That's one thing and I want to put that in there. Thanks to everybody with our groups. When we started doing the reconnects and not getting updates, I took Mandy a huge list, and she's seen how many we wasn't getting updates on. So that's something to continue doing. And she's been great with working with me. An hour and a half, we don't get a response, I shoot her an email. So I think we've really, in the last couple of weeks, got to attacking that very well.
Yes, my number of incoming emails has increased significantly, but it's one at a time, and I can send it right over so that the manager can send it to the recruiter, and they know right away, this is what happened. I need to get that driver back on the phone or not. And it has cut down on me getting lists of, what feels like 200 drivers at a time, even though it's probably 20.
Yeah.
To look into.
Yeah. Just a quick question. Application to hire rate. How many applicants do you think we should calculate? If we wanted to get 10 drivers hired a week. I know that's a hard number, but to predict, but still something that would be good for us to look at in goals.
Your particular and most successful third-party vendors are a 10-to-1 schedule to hire ratio. So you have to schedule 10 drivers to hire 1. So it would be 100 to hire 10.
Which is really the average in the industry right now with any carrier. So it doesn't mean JB Hunt's any worse or whatever than anybody else. It's going to take 10 applicants to get a hire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty. And like I said, and that's not an outrageous number for your company either. The other third-party vendors that we have that are successful, that hire more than 5 drivers a year, their ratio, it's impressive how consistently the successful ones are at a 10-to-1. Internally, it's about 5-to-1. And I think that the reason internally it's lower is because our internal recruiters have access to see previous applications. So they can see ahead of the ones that you guys call in, and and hope that they qualify for this or that. The internal ones are able to see previous applications and skip over those because they can see that information. So I think that's really the main reason why theirs are lower than third party. But for a third party, 10-to-1 is pretty right on track.
So 2 questions would be left, Mandy. I know your time's consumed as well, but if one of the biggest concerns, and I put this on here to kind of clear the air. I have heard all kinds of things from agents that just really didn't understand how it works. We know that the driver's locked in for 48 hours with us. However, agents seem to think at some points that your team doesn't go out and try to get those drivers back in, and that we're submitting drivers, and if they didn't have their employment, then in 48-hour mark, your guys are going out and getting those drivers. As well as they've heard that, your team gets bonuses for how many third-party recruiter applicants that come in, if they get them hired. Can you just kind of clear the air on that?
Yes, I can. And I will say this is my favorite question, because it's so funny how depending on what side of the sword you're on, how the conspiracy theories can sort of start to build in your own mind. And I can absolutely see where they come from. However, I do want you to know I have an internal recruiting team as well that I'm responsible for. And I can't tell you how many times a day one of them looks up and glares at me because, I'm their boss here and says, "How do your third-party people always get my drivers 5 seconds before I literally got this resume 5 seconds ago, pulled them up, and they've already got them scheduled. How are they doing this?" So, so it's certainly something that everybody feels from both sides. The one thing that I know that everybody needs to keep in mind is that when a driver is actively looking for a job enough to answer one of your advertisements or posts, they are also more than likely responding to advertisements or posts from 4 or 5 other sources. So we'll have not only all the different third-party recruiting companies out there, but our internal marketing teams, our internal advertising group, our outside marketing recruiters. Everybody's using the same platforms to post for jobs. So when a driver clicks on your post and applies for your job, talks to your recruiter, maybe before he talked to your recruiter, he talked to one of ours. Maybe after he talked to your recruiter, he talked to a different third party. So these drivers are shopping. It's what they do. And we may have 5 different people that have the exact same job posted in the exact same area. I mean, there's a limit to how many different jobs you have in one given area. So, the driver might be answering a JB Hunt ad that our internal advertising team has posted, and then answering an ad for one of my recruiters. And it's really a matter of the fastest person to give them a call back gets them scheduled. However, our internal people know, just like you guys do, that there's a 48-hour rule. So if a driver sends them a resume and they've paid money to post this ad and they've gotten this resume and they pull it up and see that it's scheduled for somebody else, and then they see later that driver is no longer scheduled, they are going to follow up with that driver. They're going to think, if the third-party recruiter didn't follow up with them, and now they're not scheduled by anybody, and it's been more than 48 hours since anybody's had them scheduled, well, I'm sure going to call them because I paid money for that ad too, if that makes sense. So sadly enough, everybody's fighting for the same driver out there, and so it happens on both ends.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So there is a system that when we submit drivers, your internal recruiters are able to see those, and they're reaching out to those drivers, which is very important for us. If you've done that work, do the follow-ups, reach back out to those drivers and try to get them in as quickly as possible, even if the 48-hour window's up. Because if not, you've got a team as well that's doing it.
Right. And it's not that we have a system in place for them to specifically to see, but they're able to see our CD Wrap, which is our system that houses the applications. So when they get a resume through one of their job posting websites, when they get a resume or an inquiry, the first thing they do is they type in that driver's name or phone number into that CD Wrap system to make sure that they're not already being worked with by another, to make sure they're not already scheduled by another recruiter, because you don't want to call somebody that's already scheduled, and if they see that driver is already scheduled, then they're going to check back and see if they're still scheduled, if they showed up, because they've paid for this advertising too, just like you guys have paid for it. They got this resume that they paid for, and they want to make sure that if you guys aren't going to be able to schedule them, that they do.
Right.
So it's everybody fighting over the same one. It's not uncommon for a different recruiter to call after that 48-hour window, and the same thing happens to our drivers. I have recruiters that will take a Friday off and have a driver that gets coded out on Friday. By the time they get in and realize it Monday afternoon, 48 hours has passed, and guess who has them scheduled? A third-party recruiter.
Right. So I guess one of the questions is, though, you said you have your own team, but when we call in and we're talking to your reps, is that part of a team? Is that a whole different division? Like, if I call in and speak, and I hate to throw her name out, but Hannah, is Hannah going to be available to get that driver hired after the 48-hour window, or is that a different team?
Now, the people that you speak with are the application specialists. So there's two. The application specialists don't recruit. They are hourly paid employees. They don't get commission for hiring drivers. Their job is to answer the phone and take that application from a driver and schedule it for orientation when the driver's called in. When it comes to follow up with the driver, that is completely on the recruiter, and both internally and externally. So while Hannah, if you try to call Hannah and she tries to call the driver and loses contact with that driver or can't get him to answer the phone, she's going to try to call a couple times right then. She's going to leave a voicemail with her number for that driver to call back. And then that driver's off her radar because he doesn't end up in a queue for her. He doesn't end up in a workflow for her. It's just somebody that she was going to take an application for that she lost contact with. So after that first couple of attempts, that driver's not going to cycle back around for her to contact unless a recruiter calls him back in. So
something, if I could just jump in here real quick, just for the whole team to know, if you trust the statistics of 1 out of 10 hires, that takes in consideration all of the topics that we've discussed today. So if you call in 7 drivers and you get 3 or 4 scheduled, that's not going to guarantee you a hire. You have to stay at it every day. You got to call in at least 10 to get 1 hired. The benefit of that is in relationship to other carriers, you have to wait till you get applications filled out. You have to pre-qualify the application. You have to go in and process the application. So it's the same statistic. You'd have to send 10 applications in to get 1 hired. So the beauty of working with JB Hunt is they know we're going to send in a lot of applicants that are not qualified. They're more like, just keep sending, keep connecting. So if you're a recruiter and you're wanting to make money and JB Hunt pays overall the most, then it makes sense that what we should do is just stay at it, continue to run ads, continue to call drivers down to JB Hunt, continue to do follow-up, and every 10 that you call in, no matter how they fall out or stay in, you're going to get a hire. Now, I will tell you, just as an example, I've received many calls from drivers calling on my ad about a JB Hunt job while they've been in JB Hunt's orientation. So it's just the nature of the beast. It's the way the industry is. But the sure bet is calling 10 drivers in for every hire. So if you want to get 3 hires, then spend the week to get 30 people transferred to JB Hunt. That's just the bottom line. Would you not agree, Mandy?
Yeah, I agree completely. And the best way to lower that ratio, if you feel like 10-1 is frustrating, is to spend that extra few minutes on the front end asking those qualifying questions. Yeah. Obviously, we learn over here that it takes the 3rd time asking the same question before the driver finally comes clean if he's got something to hide. But when it comes to experience, I mean, usually you can find out if a driver meets our experience requirements with, a very brief conversation about what it is that they're doing and what it is that they're looking for. They'll usually say, well, right now I'm having to do X, Y, Z. So you can find out if they qualify. So if you do that thorough pre-qualification, you can probably cut that number down from 10-1. But as it stands right now, I mean, if you call them in, we'll send them through the application process and see if they qualify, and just keep doing it this way. But just keep in mind that once that initial phone call, if that initial phone call does not result in a schedule, then it is the recruiter responsibility to follow up with that driver and try to call them back into us once whatever the holdup is, has been corrected, whether it be if their phone died or they needed to get their employment history together or whatever it is. It's the follow-up is the recruiter's responsibility up until the time where that driver is scheduled. Once they're scheduled, then they are on an application specialist workflow, and the application specialist and background people will be contacting them. But until you get the notification that the driver's scheduled, they're not going to be on anybody's workflow on our end. So it's the recruiter responsibility to maintain that follow-up.
I guess one of the questions that, everybody always has several things that we can kind of cover in one. With orientation being scheduled and the drivers need to confirm or sign their releases, we're really on top of that. And we've seen an improvement with our schedules. I mean, you have to admit in the last couple of weeks. But we're really on top of that and trying to get, everyone scheduled and get them to confirm. And I learned from you that even though we're sending them to that link a week prior to orientation, then they can confirm. But as well as you told me, if your reps or application specialists reach out to them, and they don't answer the phone, what we had them do by going in and confirming doesn't do any good. Is that correct?
Yeah, tell me the link that you're referring to.
Oh boy, I'll have to go.
Okay,
It's
like
where I'll have to dig at my email. It's where they enter their last four of their social.
Okay.
The link off of your site, I think.
Okay.
It's for releases, Mandy. It's where
For the release
at the
form,
beginning of the year we had an option of one or two things. We could just connect the drivers. They go through the application process, and then JB Hunt emailed them the link to finish the releases.
Mhm.
Or we could send them ahead of time and just make sure that it saves time. But we've tried both things, and I don't know what works or what doesn't work. But it's just to be able to help get these guys, confirmed faster, I guess. Because that's what we're noticing. I know that JB Hunt doesn't really start to confirm drivers until the last week before orientation, but we lose a lot. It's almost a for sure thing. If a driver's scheduled 2 weeks out with JB Hunt, they're not going to go to work.
Yeah, that is a good statistic. Actually, the closer that a driver agrees to come into orientation, their likelihood of showing up and getting hired is significantly increases. So a driver scheduled to come in next Monday is significantly more likely to show up and get hired than a driver that's scheduled for 2 weeks out. Sometimes we don't have a choice because, they already have too many schedules for next week or the week after. But anytime next week is an option for the position, it's certainly better to encourage your driver to come in then, because that's when you know that they have the biggest commitment. 2 weeks gives entirely too many opportunities for objections to come up and for them to change their mind, honestly. And usually if they're wanting to give 2 weeks notice, they're not dissatisfied enough with their current company that it's too easy for their current company to talk them into staying if they're wanting to give that consideration.
I just sent you the link, Mandy.
Yeah, I've seen it. One of the things that I'll send it to you in an email, Mandy, you can look at it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think that could improve, and I hate to say it this way, but on your end with us is we get drivers that schedule 3 and 4 weeks out because, orientation was full. However, after that first week of orientation, the position will show back up and we've got drivers we're calling in. If there was a way that those guys that schedule 3 and 4 weeks could move up and make that top priority before you open it back up, that would help us a ton. I don't know the times that we have drivers that schedule 3 weeks out and, we lose them because they need to go to work immediately.
Right.
So if there was a system implemented to where, the ones that's already scheduled move up into that slot rather than us reopening the position to everybody and getting them in, if that makes sense.
Right. And unfortunately, the system that we have right now set up is, while it is efficient in some ways, it's not a perfect system in other ways. And the way it is set up is the hiring managers go in and they set parameters for a week. So let's say they have a position that needs 1 driver. Well, they're only going to allow 2 drivers per week to schedule because the statistics show that you have to schedule 2 drivers to get 1 for a specific position. So they're going to allow 2 drivers to schedule for week 1, 2 drivers for week 2, and 2 drivers for week 3. So that first week of orientation, if one of those 2 drivers shows up and clears, that job's full, then they have time to tell the other ones that they need to be reassigned to a different position. Or if nobody shows up, or if they show up and don't clear orientation, they've already got 2 set up the next week to come in. Unfortunately, the way our system is set up is it's automated. So if one of those drivers gets rejected from week 1, and falls off the roster, it will automatically allow for someone else to be put into that spot. So if a recruiter sees that opening on week 1 and gets somebody assigned to that before an application specialist or somebody else realizes that is open and can call their driver and ask them to be moved up, then the system allows for that to happen, and there's not any way to stop it from allowing that to happen without it requiring that a hiring manager go in and open and close the job every time somebody falls on and off the roster. Does that make sense? So while it's not a perfect system, and it certainly doesn't work out for those, the best thing that I can do in those situations, which I have tried to do, is to send the hiring manager a message and let them know that if a week opens earlier, that my driver would like to move up, or my driver being your driver would like to move up, in the hopes that if they notice a driver fall off the roster, that they will be able to get a hold of that driver and have them move up before somebody else gets scheduled. Unfortunately, it's just because a hiring manager might have 50 job openings for different positions with a need of 200. It's too much for them to keep up with every single position as it opens, as people get scheduled and fall off, to have them track each one,
Yeah. Well, Mandy, I greatly appreciate you taking time. I know we've been on here an hour, almost a half now. I think we covered a lot, and thanks to everybody for coming. And I will send you an email, and maybe when you get time, and then I can send it out to the team. But in closing, is there anything that you think we can improve?
No, I think the biggest thing, and I did, like I said, I've been in some meetings, and the biggest complaint that I get from the application specialist side is drivers being called in that don't qualify for the position at all, or drivers being called in and once they go over the job with them, the driver's not interested. So I really think that that making sure that you're going over, I know you're limited as to what details you can see about a position, but making sure you're going over all of those details with the driver to make sure that the job is a good fit and it's something that they want. Because be aware, the application specialist is going to go over that job description with the driver. And just making sure that the driver's really sold. Other than that, recruiters staying on the line after transferring driver, but I don't think that's coming from your group as much as from a specific other group. So I think from your end, you guys are doing great. Just keep up the good work. Keep up the high volume. We really appreciate it. And Angie, I particularly appreciate you working with me and trying to make this a smoother, more informative process on both ends for everybody.
Mandy, one question for you before we hang up. When one of the schedulers get a phone call that's connected by a Be Exposed recruiter, do they cringe or do they smile?
I don't think they cringe at Be Exposed. Good. So that's good. Yeah. There are a couple out there that I can guarantee that they cringe at, but I do not think that you guys are one of them. So I feel like that's a definitely a positive.
Probably Berkman Group. Oh, I didn't say that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thank you. And if that does happen, send us an email. Let us know if we start getting complaints or whatever, so that way we can address it immediately. But I think we've got a pretty good team with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do too. And I do. And anytime I hear a complaint, I send it out. And I don't think I've had to send very many to you. So you would be aware if it was a problem with your team for sure.
Yeah, don't send it to John. Send it to me, though.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate everything. And I recorded this, so if anybody needs that as well. And we'll just keep plugging. We're going to eventually be your top recruiter, I think.
Perfect. I look forward to it. I'm going to go ahead and drop off, and you guys can finish up whatever you need to.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Guys, if y'all have any questions that maybe or any comments on what she discussed today, then shoot me an email because she's really good at responding to those. John, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I want to offer $1,000 to the top recruiter for JB Hunt if we get 10 dedicated hires in January.
Whoa.
John, did you say you want to pay me $1,000?
You're retired. Forget about it.
$1,000 top recruiter. It's not hard money. It's easy money. You just got to work.
Right. So he's going to pay.